All right, the reason you're watching this video is because you're having a hard time trying to decide how to solve a right triangle when given an angle and a side. The first thing you have to recognize is what function are you going to use? Are you going to use sine, cosine, or tangent to solve the question? Well, first of all, if you memorize the word SohCahToa, that means sine, that would be your SOH part of the word SohCahToa, that is your opposite side over hypotenuse ratio. If you're talking about cosine, cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And lastly, the toa part of the word SohCahToa stands for tangent, which is opposite over adjacent. Now, if you're trying to decide what is opposite and what is adjacent, let's try to think about this in terms of a neighborhood. If you live in this house right here that I just put a star on, that means your neighbors are going to be either across the street or right next to you. The one that is across the street, let's call it hypotenuse street. The one that's straight across from you, that's your opposite side. The neighbor that lives either to the right or left of you in a neighborhood or in a hallway of an apartment, the neighbor to the right or left of you, that's your adjacent side, okay? We'll call that and abbreviate it with ADJ for adjacent. So your adjacent neighbor is to the right or left. The opposite neighbor is always across the street. That'll help you decide then in the word SohCahToa which one of those functions to use. Now, as you look at these triangles, draw in hypotenuse street. Hypotenuse street goes right through the box that you see right here. And then if that's the hypotenuse, that means X is right across from the box or on the actual street. That's your hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is always, or value is on the hypotenuse street, in this case here being X. Now you're also going to have to determine where do you live. You always live where the angle is. So if your angle is 13 degrees, you live right here, okay? Now we have to decide what is this neighbor here of 27.8. That's on the same side of the street, right? You guys are left and right of each other on that street, so that means this is your adjacent neighbor. Now, we don't have an opposite side. If there was an opposite side, this would be the neighbor that's straight across, like you see right here. This would be your opposite side. I'm going to undo this because we're not working with this problem. There is no opposite neighbor, so we're just going to take that off. Now, since we only have an adjacent side and a hypotenuse that we're working with here, then you have to make sure you pick the right function. The only one in the word SohCahToa that has adjacent hypotenuse in it is this part right here. That's the cosine function. So we're going to use cosine for this question to answer the problem. So the way you're going to set it up then is by saying cosine of your angle, which is where you live, 13 degrees, equals the adjacent neighbor, that's 27.8, over X, the hypotenuse. Now the next thing is the question is, how do you put this in your calculator? Do you multiply the values or do you divide the values? So if you ever notice that X in this case here is on the downstairs of that fraction, downstairs, that means you're going to divide. Notice what it says right here. When X is downstairs, you're going to divide. Do you see how X is downstairs right here? Then we're going to take whatever number's in the top of that fraction and you're going to divide it by the sine, cosine, or tangent answer that you're working with. So we're going to take this 27.8 and we're going to divide it by the cosine of 13. So take your calculator out, and if you're trying to work along this question with me, you'd say X equals 27.8 divided by the cosine of 13 degrees. 13 degrees. Now, notice also if the X had been on the top of the fraction, just be aware of that. If X is up here instead, then you're going to take the downstairs number, not the downstairs, you're just going to take the number that's in the bottom and you're going to multiply it instead. So when X is on the main floor, on the top of the fraction, you multiply the problem. When it's down below, when X shows up down below, you're going to divide. So main floor, multiply, downstairs, divide, wherever the X shows up. So as you put that in your calculator, I'll do it myself as well. Put in 27.8 divided by cosine of 13. The other thing that might be a problem for you is your calculator might be in the wrong mode. Just make sure that your calculator is in the degree mode. So I take 27.8 divided by the cosine of 27.8. My answer comes out to be 31.43. X equals 31.43. I hope that you can have the same success that I just had here, figuring out what the length of your hypotenuse is, in this case here, minus 31.43. Hopefully yours works out well too. Good luck.